Virtual Propane Expo attendees, thanks for being here. Today we have a really cool presentation here in the Virtual Propane Expo. It's now the noon slot. We're going to have Louie Greek, and he's with his presentation is going to be about combating human trafficking in the trucking and energy industries. So we in America, believe it or not, we have an epidemic of human trafficking, and our drivers, our truck drivers, our service techs, our field employees have an opportunity to literally save lives. And it's not something I think that we in our industry have talked about it very much. So it seems really appropriate to have here. He's an expert in this whole field, and how to combat it and how to help our country with this blight. So really grateful to have Louie here. Louie, not only is he an expert in it, but he's been in this field since 2013, working to fight the overall problem facing America in the area of human trafficking. Now, I don't think it's just America that has this problem. It's most likely something that is and has been something going on behind the scenes, maybe in our country and other countries for much longer than I ever realized. So Louie, thanks for being here. You're one of our current presenters, and really grateful to have you here. I'm going to hand off the ability for you to take control. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, again, thank you for allowing Truckers Against Trafficking to really kind of speak to your audience about this critical information. Today, I'm going to talk to you about domestic sex trafficking and how that is actually occurring right here in the United States along our roadways, and how Truckers Against Trafficking and the trucking and energy industry have really become together as allies in combating this issue. And then how viewers out there today can really take some next steps to be game changers in combating human trafficking in your communities and industries as well. So what is human trafficking? Let's define that. Human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of either commercial sex, so think brothels, pimping, pornography sometimes, or for labor trafficking. Examples of labor trafficking could be agricultural fields, nail salons, the hotel industry, or the construction industry. And all of this is really being driven by a third party, that trafficker, that victimizer, who really preys on that individual, exploits them, and takes money or goods from that individual that they're exploiting. So this is human trafficking, and we do consider it modern day slavery. So we hear in the news all the time about smuggling, we hear about trafficking, we're hearing a lot more these days in the news, but a lot of times people confuse the two. And that's easy to do. You know, smuggling, that's more of a crime against a border, whereas trafficking, that's a crime against a person. For example, you may pay somebody $5,000 to smuggle you across a border, and in doing so, you've committed the crime of smuggling. However, if you get to that final destination and that person that you paid that money towards, they come to you and say, hey, you know what? That money just isn't enough. And now you must work for us for X amount of years until a certain debt is paid off. You've now kind of become a victim of human trafficking. I'll use an example. Some folks might remember a few years ago in the news down in Texas at a Walmart, they found a tractor trailer where a number of individuals who had been smuggled had suffocated. And that situation can easily have been a smuggling situation where they were complicit, they were willing to cross the border into the United States. However, you know, that situation could have changed when they got to their final destination. I also want to point out, and this is really important for viewers and listeners today, you know, most of those victims of human trafficking here in the United States are actually American-born citizens. So it is our sons and our daughters, our sisters and brothers that are actually being trafficked here in the United States. For example, we worked with a survivor of domestic sex trafficking that was trafficked right out of her home when her father allowed men to come in the garage and use her for money. So then you might be thinking, well, you know, why doesn't this person just kind of run away or go into a convenience store, make a phone call and get out of there? Unfortunately, with modern day slavery, there's so much manipulation that a lot of times traffickers don't need those physical chains or those locked doors to keep their victims compliant. You know, like you see on those movies or Hollywood movies, that just isn't very realistic. You know, traffickers use the invisible chains of force, fraud, and coercion to keep their victims under control. Force is anything you can think of. One-off beatings, brutal assaults, victims are raped, they're forced into drug addictions often, they're mutilated, they're knifed, and oftentimes they're shot. Fraud, you know, this could be maybe the false expression of a romantic interest. or maybe promising someone an exciting job in the big city, taking them away from their rural, upbringing. Or maybe it could be telling, a young girl who's in high school or in college and telling her, complimenting on her photos on Facebook or Instagram, telling her that she could be a model and then luring her into the sex trade. But without a doubt, coercion is the most powerful means that a trafficker can use. This consists of threats to safety, threats to life, even threats to family members. Or, it could be telling that young teenager that you'll post a sexually explicit video of them online for everyone at school to see or for family to see if they don't do exactly what you tell them. And I also want to point out that according to human trafficking, according to that federal definition, force, fraud, and coercion, they only need to be proved in adult human trafficking situation. So if there's a minor involved in the Commercial Sex Act, they're a victim automatically. It doesn't matter if they are smiling, they say they want to be there. It doesn't matter if maybe they're 17 and they look an adult and they dress as an adult and they even talk like an adult. That child still needs an adult to stand up for them and do for them what they cannot. Especially since oftentimes, traffickers are older, they're adults, and these victims are young teenagers, and they're inexperienced and unaware of those manipulative tactics. And so this all too often becomes a reality. So then how can we be living in 2020 and slavery still exists? And in fact, right here in the United States of America. A lot of people think that slavery was abolished with the Civil War. And I'm going to tell you about a few statistics, or show you a few statistics that's kind of going to show that that statement is kind of false. There are over 40 million victims of human trafficking globally. So that means there are more slaves today than there have been in any other period in the history of the world. And that includes the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. What's driving this crime? It's money. Human trafficking is a $150 billion annual industry, making it the most second lucrative criminal activity just after the drug trade. And recently it surpassed the arms trade. I'll tell you what, if we don't get a handle on this crime, it will soon be the most lucrative criminal activity in the world. Because again, if you think about it, with drugs, if you sell drugs, that person used that drug one time and it's gone. In regards to human beings, they can be used over and over and over again. So that's why this crime is so dangerous and so lucrative for criminals. Human trafficking happens in all 50 states. Bill, you mentioned it earlier. I don't think people always realize that. And, sure, maybe people think that this happens in a third world country or somewhere else over there, but not here in the United States. And, as mentioned, I've worked and assisted law enforcement all over the world in human trafficking investigations, and only to come back home and realize that the problem is just as bad right here. And you see it in all different levels, from developing countries to very developing countries like the United States. Trafficking extends to all different areas in all different places across the world and across the country. 1 in 6 runways are at risk of being trafficked. So nobody's immune to this crime, especially young, vulnerable children who really don't have that good support structure at home. Oftentimes, either runaways, throwaways, they're leaving a situation where they may have already experienced or witnessed abuse. And so now they're out on the streets, they have no money, they have no place to go, no shelter. And those that exploit these youth, both in the form of human traffickers as well as commercial sex buyers, really prey on these kids. And, while all children are really susceptible to the vulnerable tactics that traffickers use, certain populations are at extreme risk. So, foster kids, homeless population I mentioned, Native American or African American populations, LGBTQ are particularly susceptible to these trafficking tactics. And then according to Polaris, who runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline we'll talk about, a victim may be forced to have sex up to 20 times in one day. And sadly, this really should read, as hard as it is to hear, a victim may be raped up to 20 times a day. Just because that money is exchanging hands, it really doesn't mean that act was consensual. I want to tell you about Beth and a little bit about Beth's story. When Beth was 16, her parents got a divorce, and Beth was really close to her dad. She was a daddy's girl. And, they lived in Minnesota. Dad was going to move to Minneapolis. And so Beth wanted to join him. Dad's like, yep, you could join me. you're turning 16, you're getting closer to adult, you know, you're gonna have to go to school or get a GED and get a job. And Beth's like, absolutely, you know, I want to prove to you that I'm becoming an adult. I want to live with dad. So, you know, that's what Beth does. And at this time in Beth's life, in order to apply for those jobs, she had to take the bus, go to those actual locations, fill out that application, and have an interview with the manager. A little different than these days when we fill everything out online. But that's what Beth did. You know, she took the bus to the main terminal downtown Minneapolis and took it to different places around the city applying for jobs. And one day when Beth was waiting for the bus outside, you know, near the bus station, there was a guy waiting just in front of a bar. And he just started chatting up Beth. Said, hey, you want to come inside? You want to play a game of pool? Maybe even have a beer. And, you know, even though a lot of teenagers are told not to talk to strangers, you know, Beth's 16. She's feeling like an adult. She's out there looking for jobs. She's going to school. So she thinks, why not? So she goes in there. She plays a game of pool. She has a beer. She's feeling pretty sophisticated. She gets to know some of the patrons there. And then, you know, Beth gets on the bus and she goes home. And the next day she goes downtown. She fills out applications. She's waiting for that bus, you know, at that bus stop. And she gets the invite to go inside again. And so why not? You know, she enjoyed, she had a lot of fun. She liked getting to know these two folks. She didn't know a whole lot of people in the area. So, you know, she hung out with them. Unfortunately, though, when Beth went outside to grab the bus, she missed it. It was Saturday and the bus times had changed. The schedule had changed. So she had to call her dad. Dad comes in, you know, dad is not happy. The whole way home, Beth has to hear it. How she's not being responsible, this and that. And so it's pretty disheartening for Beth. So the next day, you know, she's back at it. She's looking for jobs, taking the bus downtown. And then she's back at that main bus stop and she doesn't want to miss it today. So she's there pretty early. But again, you know, her friends from the bar, you know, hey, come on, just come in and say hi real quick. And Beth's like looking at the watch. She's like, all right, well, I got some time. So she goes inside, hangs out just for a little bit, catches up, and goes back outside to catch that bus. Guess what? She misses the bus again. It's Sunday and the schedule's a little different and Beth just didn't check that. So what does she do? Well, she doesn't call dad, you know, she doesn't want to go through that again. So she goes back in the bar. She asks one of the guys, hey, can you give me a ride home? And they're like, absolutely, no problem. You know, Beth's kind of talked about her life and talked about her dad. So they're giving Beth the ride home. And on the way home, he's like, hey, you thirsty? I got a McDonald's, you know, Coke right here if you're thirsty or anything. Beth didn't think anything of it. She took a drink of it. And the next thing Beth remembers is that she's waking up and it's dark outside. And there's no way it should be dark. And they're at a truck stop. And Beth's kind of waking up. She's a little confused. And she looks over at the guy from the bar and says, you know what I am? And she's like, no. And he's like, I'm a pimp. And you're going to go have sex with this driver for money. And Beth kind of giggled nervously. And she tried to get out of the car and he grabbed her. He began hitting her. And he says, no, you are going to do this. And he and the driver took Beth to the cab. Beth was assaulted. She did cry out. She asked him to stop. You know, she cried out in the lot of that truck stop. She feels that other people may have seen and heard her, but really didn't get involved. And when that driver brought Beth back to that guy from the bar, the pimp, you know, he said he wanted some of his money back. She cried. And that's exactly what he did. He gave the money back and then he ended up beating Beth. He took Beth to a motel just outside of Chicago that was being used for prostitution. He took all her clothing, her ID, her belongings, even her glasses. He started to really degrade her. And then he brought other men to abuse Beth every day. And Beth would cry out and call out to them asking for help. And every time she did, she was beaten. And then over the next 6 years, while Beth was in the light, she was forced onto drug addiction. She was abused. She was arrested hundreds of times. She was beaten by buyers. She was even used by police at police parties. She was left alone, neglected, and abused. Fortunately for Beth, she was able to get out of that situation. And now today, Beth tells her story to everybody around there about, you know, how she got involved in human trafficking, in forced prostitution. That person that, you know, viewed Beth for all those years didn't realize that she was kidnapped and she was forced in that situation. And all those buyers that were with Beth, they just thought, oh, she was just a prostitute, not really knowing what was truly going on. The second myth, well, what do traffickers or pimps look like? You know, a lot of times from TV shows or music videos, we think pimps think you know, they look like they're dressed in fur coats or a lot of chains or, you know, a cane, a big hat. And that's not the case, you know, and it's a really unfortunate because if that's what we're looking for, we'll really miss what traffickers really do look like. You know, as you can see here, this crime knows no gender, racial, or socioeconomic bounds. So down in the bottom right-hand corner, you have a former firefighter, an Army veteran in the bottom left. And then I want to point out Amber Parker in the top left-hand corner. She was a Texas 8th grade teacher who's actually selling her 8th graders online to men in Morocco. That's a small town, rural town in Texas, someone that you wouldn't expect, an 8th grade teacher selling her 8th graders online. So again, folks, we've got to get rid of some of those misconceptions and realize that traffickers can be any one of us. Myth 3, it doesn't happen in my hometown. And we talked about how it is occurring here in the United States, but some people think, well, yeah, maybe in Los Angeles or, you know, New York, but not in my rural town in Nebraska or in North Dakota. Well, that's where you're wrong, you know. Unfortunately, with certain issues that's happened in our country, including the opiate crisis, we're seeing human trafficking in places like Indiana, Ohio, or, you know, how many folks out there every day talk to your kids or communicate with them on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, on the internet. You know, that's where traffickers and commercial exploitation, you know, is happening. That's where these traffickers are preying on our children. And let's be honest, it's 2020. Most kids aren't playing outside like they used to. They're not going over to friends' houses. So everybody's inside. They're on gaming, you know, online gaming. They're on social media. And that's where traffickers are taking advantage and trying to get a hold of our youth right there in our homes, no matter where we live in this country. And then, you know, earlier I mentioned human trafficking is a $150 billion annual industry. And so in the case of sex trafficking, where's all that money coming from? It's these guys. You know, if we were to arrest and round up all the traffickers today, put them all in jail, tomorrow we'd actually have more traffickers. Why? Because it's the demand for commercial sex. So if we really want to put a stop to this crime, we have to hold these folks accountable if we're, you know, ever going to really try to curb this issue. I want to tell you another story, and we'll come back to the end here, but these two made national headlines about 5 years ago when they were arrested at a Virginia truck stop. This is Laura Swanson and Nadlar Hodza, and they were driving an RV. It was parked at a truck stop in Virginia, and troopers were called to that because of some suspicious activity. And so troopers knock on the door of the RV. These two answer. They're real friendly. They allow them inside, you know, start chatting them up. They tell troopers that they're just on a road trip on the way to visit Swanson's daughter. And as they're kind of chatting up troopers, one of the troopers actually notices that there's a girl in the back of the RV. She's not engaged in the conversation. Her hands in her lap, her head is down. Her hair's kind of, you know, matted, unkept, but her face is very heavily made up. And I don't know, the trooper thought this just didn't seem right. And as these two continue to kind of chat up everybody else, they point out the front window at a monument that they went and saw earlier that day across from the rest stop. And as everybody kind of drew their attention in that direction out the window, that one trooper looked at that girl who motioned that she needed help. So they just kind of quietly walked out the RV, walked around the building, and as soon as they got away from viewing distance of the RV, the girl began to cry, and she begged the trooper not to let her back inside. She said that the suspects had taken her from her home in Clive, Iowa, and that they'd been abusing her both physically and sexually. She couldn't remember the last time she had anything to eat, adding that it had been several days had passed. Right away, this trooper's like, well, let's get you in an ambulance. Let's get you some medical attention. And as they did, and as they started doing that external examination, paramedics, she said, you know, you're going to find bruises and branding all over me. Because the suspects would heat up different utensils on the stove in the RV and burn her with those. She even made an attempt to run away, and they caught her, and they dug rusty nails into the bottom of her feet. So she wouldn't attempt to do that again. You know, the investigation later revealed that she was forced to perform oral sex on Hodza and another unknown male that very same day at that truck stop. And there was no missing persons report for her. No one at home suspected anything wrong because these two forced her to communicate with family members, sending text messages or pictures or selfies, telling them that nothing was wrong and that she was just on a road trip with friends. The doctors say that if troopers hadn't been called, if they hadn't responded and got her medical attention, that she probably would have died in a matter of days due to the starvation, abuse, and neglect from these two. And unfortunately, folks, this is what human trafficking looks like here in America and along our roadways. So in response to those realities, Truckers Against Trafficking recognized that the trucking industry and the energy industry, through their sheer size, through their extensive travels, and just kind of the very nature of their jobs, can really be an extra set of eyes and ears for law enforcement in recovering victims and having traffickers arrested. Especially since a lot of times those professional drivers, they're often in places where they can come in contact with potential victims. Places like truck stops, rest stops, hotels, motels, bus terminals. And although this list right here is not exhaustive, the traffickers, they're opportunists. I mentioned earlier, they're taking people to places where, passerby or someone else might think, well, hey, that's just a prostitute. That's not my business. But what if drivers knew what to look for and knew about human trafficking and then immediately reported it? Imagine how many lives could be saved and how many traffickers arrested. And that is our goal. So we began Truckers Against Trafficking in 2009 with a mission to equip, educate, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking and energy industries to combat this as part of their regular jobs. And in order to do that, we have kind of three main goals. So our first goal is to really saturate those related industries with our training materials. So this varies from our training DVD that I'll talk about, wallet cards, window decals, brochures, posters, you name it. We have the materials that are free and available for those within industry to educate them on about this issue. So the primary tool that we use to educate those within the trucking industry is our Phase 2 DVD. And this is a simple plug and play 27-minute video to really educate those drivers and employees about human trafficking, what to look for, and how to properly report it. So I can mail you copies of the DVD. You can find it on our website from anywhere at any time at truckersagainsttrafficking.org. If you use a learning management system, we can implement it into an LMS. Or it can also be found on our TAT app for Android and iPhone. And speaking of that app, don't forget to download it so you too can report human trafficking if you should see it. And again, these trainings are super easy. It could be implemented into like a monthly or quarterly safety meeting or during orientation. And then our other primary tool that we use that complements that training video is our wallet card. And this is a simple piece of paper that goes in the pockets, purses, and hands of those drivers and employees out there. On the front, you'll see that National Human Trafficking Hotline number, 1-888-3737-888. And this is the number that anybody can call to anonymously and confidentially report a tip, as well as access those victim services. And again, the hotline is connected to law enforcement and victim services all across the country. So your tip will get in the right hand. I want to point out too, on the back side of that wallet card, the warning, not to approach traffickers on your own, not to attempt rescue. This is law enforcement's job. We really encourage those drivers to make that call from the anonymity of their cab. However, if they do see something happening at like a truck stop or rest area, go inside and let the manager know what's going on, as well as calling that number. And then when you open up that wallet card, on the top, you'll see that basic definition of human trafficking, as well as what law enforcement need to open up an investigation. So actionable information, things like dates, times, descriptions of individuals or vehicles, license plates numbers. All this will help that law enforcement initiate that investigation. And on the right-hand side, you'll see some questions you can ask a potential victim and some trafficking red flags. For example, do they know where they are? Oftentimes traffickers move their victims from place to place so they can't establish relationships and they don't know where to get help. Is there any signs of, or any talk of money or making a quota? Any signs of branding or tattooing? All this will really help that driver determine whether they are dealing with a human trafficking situation. However, some of the two most obvious signs are, one, we talked about earlier, that minor involved in commercial sex. So that's a huge sign. And then if there's any sign of pimp control, and a lot of times the traffickers or the pimps, they stay on the premises. They may be in a car on the other part of the lot. Sometimes they're even part of the bartering process. And I also want to point out, the hotline is staffed there 24/7 to answer any questions. So even if that driver or employee isn't sure it's a trafficking situation, the staff will walk them through that and help them in any way. We like to say better to make that call and not have it turn out to be a human trafficking situation than to leave it alone and that person endures a life of sexual slavery. I think some of those of us that have been in the industry, in the trucking industry, we've heard this term lot lizard. And unfortunately, this is a very degrading and dehumanizing term used to describe people or prostituted people in the trucking and energy industry. And by calling them these names, by degrading them, you look at them as a problem or a nuisance, or as a prostitute, and not really fully understanding that these are individuals and human beings that probably weren't there by choice, similar to Beth's situation. And so, we like these people that have these stickers. Why? Because they're not purchasing commercial sex. But we really want to change their mindset from looking at them as a problem to somebody that might need help. And so that's why TAT created our window decals that go up in the cabs of those windows. And this really helps those drivers remember, that National Human Trafficking Hotline number and the ways that they can help potential victims. And we've also seen that as those that need help, as they're going through truck lots, they've seen this sticker on a cab of a window and know that was a truck that they can approach and they can receive help. And then also within TAT, we have many programs. One of those is our TAT Empowering Freedom program that has all kinds of materials from an additional video, wallet card, posters, and a toolkit specifically for those that are working in and around the energy industries. Because, traffickers are looking to exploit all types of industries, including that energy industry. You may have, for example, a rural part in North Dakota where they are exploring energy, and that's brought in jobs and businesses into this rural area. However, traffickers look to exploit that too. So they'll bring victims to that area and try to exploit them in that area. And so that's why we find it important to provide training that is industry specific for those that are working in that energy industry to identify certain trafficking trends that they may see, identify, and report so that they can prevent it from occurring around their industries. And then TAT also partners with law enforcement to facilitate the investigation of human trafficking. And we've co-created multiple models that are being used throughout the country because we truly believe that trucking and law enforcement need to be partners in closing loopholes to traffickers. And we really try to bring together, federal, state, and local agencies, along with those key industry stakeholders on a routine basis to do just that. One of those ways that we partner with MVE and CVE officers and state agencies is through our Iowa MVE model. And this is really to capitalize on those intersections with the commercial vehicle industry. Things such as training motor vehicle enforcement or law enforcement with TAT'S law enforcement training video that is specifically to what law enforcement will see while they're doing interdiction stops. Or how about passing out our TAT wallet card at CDL issuances or renewals? Or how about weigh stations? So far we have about 48 states that have participated in this model in part or in full. And we're really working on getting some of those other states into full implementation. So even though you may not work for a state agency, you may be a decision maker or an influencer that can get some of these models implemented into your community. And then another way TAT is really trying to reach the trucking and driver industry is through implementing either legislation or administrative change to having TAT human trafficking training at that CDL school level. So what does that mean for you? That means that this next generation of drivers, they will know about human trafficking. They'll know how to recognize it and properly report it. So far we have 12 states that have implemented this. And I think this is a great initiative. We hope to have all drivers out on the road in the future know about human trafficking. And then finally, our last goal is to really rally the resources and marshal the resources to combat this crime. But of course, we couldn't do this without our partnership in trucking, in shipping, and energy, who partner with us to either train their employees, encourage another key industry stakeholder to become part of the program, or just partner with TAT to get the word out. We are continually grateful for those that are really helping us move the needle. Because let's be honest, this is your industry. You know your industry. Let you take ownership of it. Let's take ownership of it and ensure that human trafficking doesn't take place in it. And as you can see, there's some incredible partners right here that are supporting TAT and supporting this mission to eradicate modern day slavery and the trucking and energy industries. And guess what, folks? The great news is that it's actually working. So far, truck drivers have made over 2,600 calls into that national human trafficking hotline, leading to a likely 690 cases and involving an astounding 1,276 potential victims. And I want to point out, folks, that this is just the calls into that hotline, that national hotline. A lot of times drivers call 911 or your local sheriff's department. So we are not counting all those calls coming from those drivers into the local police. But it shows you, the scope of this problem and then what one industry, the trucking and energy industry, is really doing to combat this issue. But, ultimately, it brings it back to this guy and the millions like him that diligently and safely deliver products all across our nation. This is professional driver Kevin Kimball. He used to drive for Conway Truckload. And Kevin just happened to be pulling into that same Virginia truck stop that Laura Swanson and Adlar Hodzar had their RV in. And Kevin pulled in there and he took his break. And as he's filling out paperwork and on his break, he looks up and he notices this RV. He notices that a couple guys go in and out of the RV pretty quickly. And he thought, that didn't seem right, but, maybe it's just, a weird fluke. And he looks up again and he sees that there's a young girl looking out the window. And all of a sudden, it seems like she's snatched back and the curtains are drawn in place. And he thought, that doesn't seem right. And he's had TAT training. So Kevin gave a call to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, who contacted local law enforcement, and you guys know the rest of the story. And at the end, because of Kevin's call, because of Kevin taking action and making that call from the anonymity of his cab, it led to the recovery of that young lady and the arrest of those two suspects who are now serving 40 and 41 years in prison for human trafficking. And we love to recognize and award those that are making a difference within the industry. So if it's one of your employees, one of your drivers, somebody that that made a call that resulted in the recovery or the arrest in regards to a human trafficking situation, please let us know. We would love to celebrate both that driver and the company with our next Harriet Tubman Award. When a lot of people hear about this horrible crime, they want to get involved. But, not everybody's really in a critical position to make that reality. But you guys are, as leaders in the trucking industry, as leaders in the energy industry, you have the ability, you're uniquely positioned to be able to combat human trafficking as part of the everyday jobs. The first thing is partner with TAT, become TAT trained. Simply implement that TAT training video into orientation or a safety meeting. If you contract services out for drivers, security, or janitorial staff, share that information with them too. The more that can be trained in our industry, the safer it will be. Make human trafficking a priority around there. Use your influence. There may be people that are listening, there may be people that you're thinking today that aren't listening or haven't viewed this that really need to hear this. So share the link, share the opportunity for people to watch this training and information today. And then take this very important message back home to your dining room tables, because your children, your grandchildren need to know about human trafficking, what traffickers look like, and they need to hear it from somebody they love. Other ways that you can get involved. How about from a risk management standpoint? We have an opportunity to adopt an anti-trafficking in persons policy with a demand reduction focus. So this is how this works, is in that employee handbook, we provide, kind of some verbiage and language that just states a policy that employees state that they will not engage in purchasing commercial sex on company time or with company assets. So what does that do? One, it deters that individual from purchasing commercial sex and creating a human trafficking situation. And two, that company takes their stance against human trafficking and their corporate social responsibility into fighting modern day slavery. As well as, hey, from a risk management standpoint, how could that not be a benefit to you? And then another way to get involved with Truckers Against Trafficking, we are a nonprofit. We're fully funded by corporate sponsors, some of those that you saw, as well as individual donations. And we are grateful for those out there that really are helping us continue this mission. Without your support, without your funding, we wouldn't be able to have these presentations today and reach a lot more folks within your industry. So please consider about becoming a corporate sponsor or an individual donor. And in closing, as we're getting towards the end, I just want to finish off with another recent success story. This happened just a couple weeks ago. in Missoula, Montana, where a young woman, fairly disoriented, she had her shoes in her hands, she was very confused. She went up to a cashier at a truck stop. And she said that the guy that she's with wasn't taking her to where she wanted to go. And they had taken all her money and her belongings. And that employee, they had our TAT training. And they thought, boy, this just isn't right. And they let their supervisor know. And based on this girl's circumstances, based on their training, they're like, we better get the local sheriff. And they did. And even as deputies were on their way, unknown males were trying to approach this young woman. But these employees kept a good eye on her. And when deputies arrived, they were able to take her into their custody, unhandcuff, and provide her with medical attention. They ran her name, and comes to find out there was a missing persons report for her out of the Seattle area. They got a hold of Dad, and Dad said that she went missing working on her car out front. And she was really intelligent. She probably wouldn't have gone willingly. And all because of the TAT training here, all because of this employee's simple action to get involved, they were able to reunite this girl with her father after being found 500 miles away from home. And folks, this is TAT in action. This really does work. Human trafficking is one of the worst human rights violations of our time. And while the majority of us, would desire to go above and beyond the bottom line and really ensure that our careers have long-lasting change for the good, not everybody is in a position to make that reality. But you guys are. As leaders in the trucking and energy industries, you can help build up an army of eyes and ears to report human trafficking and ensure that more lives can be saved. Thank you very much. Here is my contact information. I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any requests for materials. I can send you the DVDs, our wallet cards, posters, anything like that. If there's other ways you want to partner with TAT or become a corporate sponsor, again, please reach out to me. And again, thank you for allowing us to speak at the virtual Propane Expo.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louie. Really appreciate it. It's fabulous information. And the times we're in require us to take a stance against stuff like this. 40 million people globally are enslaved in something like this. So it's shocking to think that slavery is alive and well. It's just shocking. But it is here in the United States and in other countries, right?
Yeah, it sure is. And so, that number may seem huge. It may seem a bit overwhelming, but I can't emphasize, your small part in getting involved and the simple action that you can do to really kind of make a difference and make that number a lot less.
Fabulous. Great information. We're honored to have you on this so we can continue to share the story. So thanks for giving us some steps on how to do that. So for our team, for everybody that's in the Virtual Propane Expo, here's what you can do. If you didn't take notes on this, or if you want to share this with somebody else, you go to virtualpropaneexpo.com, go to the presentations dropdown, and then under the presentations dropdown, it says past presenters. Now, in a week from now, we should have this whole presentation recorded and edited and put back up onto the site. So if anybody wanted to be in this, couldn't make it, they can still hear it and share it. So we're going to put it onto the Expo, and we're also going to put it onto our YouTube channel. So it'll be a nice, easy to share link. You can share it with people. So that's number one, you can reshare it. Number two, what a brilliant way to close, giving us some ideas on how to share this with our own families and things like that. And thanks for the real life stories too of what's really going on to help illustrate what the real deal is. So thank you, Louie. It's great. Appreciate it. Great job. All right, everyone. Thanks again for being at the Virtual Propane Expo. The next presentation is going to start in 12 minutes. And so please check in again, go, do a restroom break or whatever it takes, and look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again, Louie. Take care. Bye-bye.